Hello everyone, my name is Nikki Halverson. I'm the post-adoption coordinator for the Northwestern region of North Dakota, and I will be presenting this month's webinar, Mind and Body, Childhood Trauma, adapted from the book, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, MD. Within this webinar, we will be talking about the impacts of childhood trauma, specifically related to adopted children from foster care. Important topics covered includes discussion and a brief overview of The Body Keeps the Score, the impact of stress or trauma on the brain, the impact of trauma on relationships and attachment, potential behavioral impacts of trauma, and the importance to know and understand this information as both a foster and adoptive parent. First, as I mentioned previously, the information I will be discussing throughout this webinar is largely adapted and drawn from the book, The Body Keeps the Score, by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. As a professional in this field, I would encourage families to check this book out as it could provide quality insight to the impact of trauma on the mind and body, as this webinar only provides a small sliver of the information from this text. On that note, you probably are wondering what this book is even about. So, I want to provide a brief overview of The Body Keeps the Score. Within The Body Keeps the Score, Bessel thoroughly addresses the complex relationship between the mind and body and how trauma can have a large impact on an individual's overall functioning and development. In support of the findings, he applies his clinical experiences and neurological evidence while also exploring a variety of treatment modalities. Moving on, let's discuss the impact of stress on the brain. In order to see how stress impacts our brains, we need to look at what happens when the brain detects a threat. So, when a threat occurs, the hypothalamus is impacted. The hypothalamus is a structure within the brain that produces hormones that controls many functions within the body and the ability to maintain homeostasis. More specifically, related to the occurrence of a threat, the hypothalamus releases stress hormones. Stress hormones are hormones used to help regulate our body's reaction to stress, which also helps maintain homeostasis. Therefore, triggering a fight or flight response. A fight or flight response is an automatic stress response that triggers the body to fight or flee when a threat or danger is detected. So when thinking about the impact of stress on the brain, these are just some of the main areas and functions that are all correlated and impacted when the brain detects a threat or stress. So when these functions occur, our brain typically provides a lightning-fast response to a threat, but then quickly returns to its equilibrium. However, when chronic trauma is experienced repeatedly, our brains sometimes do not return to equilibrium, and our fight or flight responses or signals continue after the danger is over due to a continued secretion of stress hormones, thus impacting one's overall functioning, which we will discuss later in this webinar. Next, let's discuss the impact of trauma on relationships and attachment. In terms of relationships and attachment, youth become attached to whoever acts as their primary caregiver. The nature of that attachment greatly impacts the youth, thus resulting in different types of attachment. There are two main attachment styles that we will be discussing as it pertains to trauma. The first includes secure attachment. Secure attachment forms when parents' responses are tuned with their child's needs and are meeting their needs. The second type of attachment includes disorganized attachment. Disorganized attachment develops when neglect or abuse occurs, and with this there is often a constant mode of threat, which is often correlated with trauma. This leads me to my next point I want to discuss, which includes another important connection between trauma and relationships and attachment. When trauma is experienced, reliable and responsive caregiving assists with the ability to maintain emotional regulation through emotional attunement. Therefore, when reliable and responsive caregiving is consistently provided, secure attachment is formed when caregiving includes that crucial emotional attunement. Before moving on to the behavioral impacts of trauma, let's recap and learn a little bit more about trauma and the impacts it can have on our brain through a more visual illustration by watching this short video called Childhood Trauma and the Brain, contributed by the UK Trauma Council and Anna Freud from the National Centre for Children and Families, located in the UK.
Brain development is much more than a story about biology. From the earliest years, relationships with others play a key role in shaping how our brain grows and develops. Early relationships, where there is abuse and neglect, have a long-term impact on children. A brain that has adapted to survive in a threatening or unpredictable world may not work so well in an ordinary environment. This can create what is called latent vulnerability, where early abusive or neglectful experiences with carers put children at greater risk of experiencing mental health problems in the future. For these children, compared to their peers, common experiences like moving to a new school can feel more daunting and stressful. New faces can appear threatening, while positive social cues can be missed. It can be harder to negotiate new social situations and learn to trust new people. Even fun experiences like joining a new sports team can be challenging. Too much focus on potential threat cues can mean missing out on positive social cues such as a playful nudge. Or it causes an overreaction, which leads to an increased risk of conflict and sometimes violence. These reactions can increase the likelihood of generating new stressful events. It's harder to deal with everyday challenges when you feel unconfident and anxious inside, and harder to build and maintain relationships. Over time, this can mean a child loses friends and the support of adults, and so misses out on opportunities to grow and develop. This social thinning can increase the risk of mental health problems in the future. Neuroscience research is beginning to shed new light on how vulnerability unfolds over a child's life. All children need care and stimulation from adults who value them and who show them attention and love. These experiences shape a child's brain development. When children face traumatic experiences like abuse and neglect, their brain adapts to help them cope. We know of changes in 3 different brain systems: the reward, memory, and threat systems. Experiences of domestic violence or physical abuse can lead to hypervigilance, where the brain reacts more to threat. This might help a child stay safe in an early adverse environment, but it can cause problems in more ordinary environments. Hypervigilance can best be understood as a pattern of adaptation rather than a sign of damage. Abuse and neglect can also mean a world where a child's basic needs for care and attention are not met. This can shape the brain's reward system, the part of the brain that helps us learn about positive aspects of our environment and motivates our behaviour. Over time, the brain's reward system can learn to respond differently to things like positive social cues. Neuroscience studies have also pointed to changes in the autobiographical memory system, our memory of everyday past experiences. Following trauma, negative memories appear to become more salient, which means they become more prominent than positive ones. And everyday memories can also become less detailed. This is a problem because we need to draw on past experiences to help us deal with new social situations. Neuroscience research is showing how childhood trauma can create latent vulnerability, increasing the risk of later mental health problems like anxiety and depression. This vulnerability is not just located in the child, but arises through their relationships. Helping children who have experienced trauma still requires ordinary boundaries and consequences, but it also requires us to step back and reflect and see behaviour that we find challenging in a different light. A child may simply be doing their best to survive now, with brain adaptations from the past. We know a child's brain has the capacity to continue to adapt. For this to happen, they need our help to build and maintain trusted relationships, manage everyday stressors, and prevent new ones from happening. We need to encourage them to try again and believe things can be different. This is far from an easy task and takes time. Science is helping reframe our understanding of childhood trauma. Seeing children's behaviour in a new light can mean we respond differently. But there is much still to learn. Working together, we can develop more effective approaches that promote resilience and recovery. We can help children build trusting relationships and create opportunities for their brains to adapt in new ways.
So, as we have seen in that video and discussed in the earlier parts of this webinar, trauma has a huge impact on an individual's overall well-being and truly shapes how one responds and reacts to certain situations based on past experiences, therefore contributing to emotional, mental, and overall health complications, some of which that are often seen or talked about as behaviors. A major complication with behaviors we see relates to difficulty with emotional regulation and coping, which can lead to difficulty with impulse control, increased irritability, and involvement in harmful behaviors such as substance use. Memory and attention difficulties can also occur. These can negatively impact academic functioning and abilities. And it is also very important to note that even though the child may not remember the event itself, they can sometimes sense the physical and emotional responses related to the event even long after it has occurred, thus resulting in what we recall as behaviors. Relationships and bonding is also impacted. This could include difficulty forming meaningful relationships and also can result in both dependency and distrust towards their caregivers. Another aspect that can be seen includes difficulty with sleep, such as irregulated sleep schedules, which could also be related to sleep disorders as a result of trauma. Lastly, I want to review the importance to know and understand this information as both a foster and adoptive parent. First and foremost, the intent of this webinar was to prepare and not scare. These children who have been adopted through foster care or are currently in foster care have experienced trauma in one form or another. After learning about the impacts that trauma can have on an individual's overall health and functioning, we are able to understand that there often is a reason behind a behavior. Therefore, as a foster or adoptive parent, it is your responsibility to be aware of these events and how they may be impacting your child's life, thus allowing you to fully advocate for your child's needs as it relates to their experiences. And if you're struggling on where to start, always know that consistency is key. Thank you for listening to this webinar. I truly hope that you've enjoyed it and you were able to obtain quality insight and knowledge regarding trauma and its impacts on overall functioning and well-being. Reference for this webinar are on the following slide if you wish to explore some additional resources and information.